Well, good morning, everyone, and welcome to Knox Church. It is 11 a.m., and I am in my office, and I am pleased to be joined by a very special guest, Mr. Fred Hacker.
Good morning, Alton, and I'm delighted that you dared to have me join you again.
Well, there were a few emails saying don't bring that guy back on, but I decided to do it anyway.
One of those was from me.
It was, and your wife, too. So, Fred, one of the things that I've heard over and over again, I wanted to get your opinion on, was this phrase right here that God will not give you more than you can handle. Have you ever heard that phrase before?
I have heard that phrase before.
Yeah, it's something that comes up time and time again for me, and I wondered if I'm the only one that hears this, but I think it's something that a lot of people say. It's kind of this idea that when you're given a heavy burden, it's a burden given to you by God, and because it's given to you by God, He'll only give you what you can bear. So I was just wondering, you have a breadth of experience in your life. I know you've gone through a lot. Have you ever experienced or been given a burden that you felt was almost too much to bear?
I think it's fair to say that I've had burdens that I wondered how I would cope with them. But I also should clarify that I never felt they were given to me, and I think that's a distinction that we have to make. I do have a little story that I could tell you that perhaps illustrates how people feel about this.
Yes, please.
There's a story about someone who was carrying their cross and complained to God that their cross was too heavy, that they'd been given too big a burden to carry. And God said to this person, "Well, I'll take your cross and meet me at the cross warehouse tomorrow morning, and we'll give you one that fits." So the person showed up at the cross warehouse the next morning with God, and God said, "Now there's a wall full of crosses. Just pick one you want." And the person said, "Well, there's one little one there. I'll take that one." And God said, "Well, okay, yeah, that's fine. Take that." And the fellow said, "Well, it fits pretty well." And God said, "Well, it should. It's the one that I took from you yesterday."
Oh, yeah, that's a great story. And I think it really highlights the fact that our perspective on our burdens can often be skewed sometimes. Are you brave enough to share with us maybe one of the more difficult moments in your life?
Well, I don't want to get too personal, but there have been. I'll just give you an example. My middle daughter suffered a horrendous automobile accident when she was 18, and we got a phone call at 2:30 in the morning, wakened by a police officer who said, "You'd better get to the hospital. We're not sure your daughter will live to get to the hospital." So that was a horrible trauma for us. And then the officer said, "And we're not sure what hospital she's going to." So we ended up at what was then Huronia District Hospital, and she was just, most of the bones in her upper body were broken. And you know, in some ways, Alton, I think we can bear more ourselves than to see our children suffer. Um, but we got through that. She got through that. We were told by the surgeon that she would be in a wheelchair within 10 years. She wasn't. In fact, on the 20th anniversary of the accident, she climbed Mount Kilimanjaro just to prove that she was okay.
I love that story. I've heard it a couple times and it just gets better. During that time, did anyone say to you, "Don't worry, the Lord won't give you more than you can handle"?
I don't think during that time I heard that, but I certainly have heard it. And from family members. My grandmother, who was a wonderful Christian, would sometimes say that.
I think for some, maybe it's a very comforting phrase. I'm not sure how biblical it is, and you've already alluded to that maybe this might not be actually a biblical statement.
Yeah, I think it's comforting for people. The problem is that the reciprocal of it is, does God give me burdens? Does God put problems in my way? And the opening question you asked was whether I ever felt I'd been given burdens, and I do not believe that God heaps burdens on us to see how much we can bear. That's not the God of love that I worship.
I want to share with you a Bible verse. And this is the Bible verse, 1 Corinthians 10:13, 12 to 13, where this phrase comes from. So if you think you are standing firm, be careful that you don't fall. No temptation has overtaken you except what is common to humanity, and God is faithful. He will not let you be tempted beyond what you can bear. But when you are tempted, He will also provide a way out so that you can endure it. When I read this verse, the word temptation pops up. And I think, have we been reading this verse all wrong this whole time?
I think so. Like many verses, I think it's been adapted to suit the purpose of somebody who is interpreting it, and it's dangerous to cherry pick pieces of scripture, to take a verse out of context, not to understand to whom that was being written, why it was being written, what the circumstances were that were being addressed in the letter.
Yeah, I know it doesn't make for the most exciting sermons, but I'm going to leave you in a minute and try to address the context of that verse. And hopefully we can break it down. Before we go, maybe you have a question for me. I know I didn't really answer your question last week very well, but do you have a question you'd like for me to answer today?
Well, it probably leads into what you're going to do next week, but I do think that this topic that we've discussed this morning throws up the question: uh, at what point does God control what happens to us?
Yeah. Again, you give me a nice softball. I appreciate that. Well, hopefully I can address this again. Like last week, I gave my best shot. I'm not an expert in that, even though I have spent maybe 1 or 2 minutes studying the topic. But these are all very difficult, complex topics. But hopefully we'll be able to dive into this verse for you folks this morning and get a little bit clarity about what it means to be burdened and what God's role plays in that and how we can respond to it as well. Thank you so much, Fred, for joining me once again.
Thanks, Alton.
As long as I had known her, Laura dreamed about being a mom. It was her life's ambition to be a mother. When she met a nice guy and got married and settled down, they had their first son, and Laura was living out her dream. I could not have been more happy for her and the little family that she was creating. As their family grew, Laura and her husband moved out of downtown Toronto to a suburb outside the city in a larger town. They bought a big house where real estate was cheaper, and there were backyards to play in and lots of room to grow. Well, shortly after that, she became pregnant with her second baby boy, and Laura's heart swelled with joy as her little family began to take shape in the way she had always dreamed. And then one day, her youngest, who was just about to enter into junior kindergarten, became sick. And after a few days, he just didn't get better. And after a week or so, they realized something was wrong. They made an appointment with the doctor, and he referred them to a specialist who referred them to Sick Kids Hospital. And it was there that they heard the word that would change their lives, the life of that family forever: leukemia. What do you say to somebody in that situation? What comfort can you offer? It may be tempting to tell her that the Lord will never give you more than you can handle. After all, somebody has probably said that to you at some point in your journey. And I totally get why we say this, because when we say it, we mean something like, you're strong, you're tough, you can do this, you're up to the challenge, you'll get through it. Or as my 4-year-old son, who turns 5 this week, Paxton, says, you've got this. You know what? There is nothing wrong with wanting to be encouraging, with wanting to help someone get through the tough times. It's natural to want to tell somebody that this will not defeat you. This will not overwhelm you. God is in control. He still loves you, and He will not allow you to be defeated by this. But as good as this impulse is, for me, there are a few problems with this way of proceeding, because this statement implies a few things. Number one, that the Lord, at least in Laura's situation, gave my child leukemia. I find that problematic. I'm sorry. Number two, if I can't deal with what's going on in my life, if I can't handle things as they're happening to me, then there must be something wrong with me, especially my faith. And three, I think it's just a misreading of 1 Corinthians 10:13, which we've already heard read a couple times today. So why don't we take a minute and go through these one by one. Let's talk about the idea that the Lord may have given somebody's child leukemia. I have a hard time imagining God up there, wherever He is, handing out diseases to all the young children. And I'm sorry if that's a controversial statement, but it's one that I stand on. And I have to think that if I'm a parent, I would find it extremely difficult to find comfort and to find strength in a God who would inflict this on my precious child. For what? To test my faith? You know, church, this is a recipe for a crisis of faith. And you can see now how sometimes a well-meaning phrase meant to encourage can actually have the opposite effect. There are burdens in life, dear church, that we simply cannot handle alone. And this phrase makes us feel like if we can't handle everything on our own, then there's something wrong with our faith. But there are times in this life when we just simply can't do it by ourselves. Soldiers who return from war, people who suffer from severe schizophrenia, moms who are experiencing postpartum depression, those who have experienced divorce or death or disease. You can't do it on your own. We will all face times in our lives when we simply cannot handle things on our own, and this phrase suggests that if we can't, there is simply something wrong with us and our faith. And I have to tell you, this does not help in time of distress. I remember back when I was in Bible college, and I was in my third or fourth year, and I was dating a freshman. Yeah, I know, good for me, right? And she was this smart, young, beautiful young woman, but the rigors of the academic life and the responsibility of college life was getting to her. And a lot of things from her past sort of surfaced in that year while she had her first real taste of freedom, and she fell into depression. And being in my third or fourth year, I had taken some counseling courses and gone through the checklist, and I said, you know, I really think you need to talk to somebody about this. And she said, you know, I think you're right. I said, why don't you go talk to your parents? Maybe it's time to find a counselor to help you through. So she did. She went and sat her parents down and said, Mom and Dad, I think I'm depressed. I think I need some help. And they looked at her and they said, we don't need help in this family. You don't need counseling. You just need to pray more. Well, that was devastating for her because she felt like she was a failure, not just as a daughter, but as a human being at life. And so I talked with her and I said, there's another avenue, and we enrolled her in the free counseling program at the Bible college. And I took her as her hand trembled down the hallway, and I sat outside in the hallway as she went in to those doors for her first counseling session. She was so nervous. But when she came out, I said, "How did it go?" And she said, "It was so great." And, I'm not saying her problems went away overnight, but she found the help that she needed. And her counselor was able to help her see that it's okay to need help from other people. Thirdly, it's a misreading of 1 Corinthians 10:13. Now, the only way to understand a single verse is to see it in context. So what I'd like to do is kind of go back a bit, right back to verse 1. And I know it's a lot of verses, but let's just kind of read through this and get the lay of the land, okay? So, 1 Corinthians chapter 10. "For I do not want you to be ignorant of the fact, brothers and sisters, that our ancestors were all under the cloud, and that they all passed through the sea. They were all baptized into Moses in the cloud and in the sea. They all ate the same spiritual food and drank the same spiritual drink, for they drank from the spiritual rock that accompanied them." Okay, so here Paul is just setting the scene of the ancestors, those faithful Jewish men and women who followed God's example, who obeyed the covenant, those kind of people who went through the Exodus and into the promised land, that whole story. He's saying these are our ancestors. And he continues, that rock that nourished them was Christ. Nevertheless, God was not pleased with most of them. Their bodies were scattered in the wilderness. Oh, it took a sharp turn there, didn't it? Yeah. Now, these things occurred as examples to keep us from setting our hearts on evil things as they did. Do you remember how they grumbled in the wilderness against Moses, said, "We'd rather be in captivity than be here with you, Moses, starving to death"? At least then we had at least one meal a day. Do not be idolaters, as some of them were, as it is written, "The people sat down to eat and drink, and got up to indulge in revelry." We should not commit sexual immorality, as some of them did. And in one day, 23,000 of them died. We should not test Christ, as some of them did, and were killed by snakes. And do not grumble, as some of them did, and were killed by the destroying angel. This sounds terrible. These things happened to them as examples and were written down as warnings for us, on whom the culmination of the ages has come. So if you think that you are standing firm, be careful that you don't fall. No temptation has overtaken you except what is common to humanity. In other words, it doesn't matter your spiritual roots. We all experience temptation. We've all given in, and we've all experienced the consequence. But God is faithful. He will not let you be tempted beyond what you can bear. But when you are tempted, he will also provide a way out so that you can endure it. Okay, there's a lot going on here, and we can't get into everything. If you have any questions, I expected questions from the last sermon, didn't get any, but if you have questions, email them to me, and I'll try to address them in going deeper. There's a lot going on here, so let's provide some context. First, the letter to the Corinthians was written by the Apostle Paul to the church in Corinth around a couple decades or so after Jesus' death and resurrection. Corinth was a crossroads city. It was a very cosmopolitan town with lots of activity and people from different places and backgrounds. Think of downtown Toronto with its many ethnic and religious centers and its melting pot of cultures. And so the Corinthians would have worshipped a host of various gods and goddesses in a host of various ways, including idolatry and drunkenness and cultic sacrifice and temple prostitution, just to name a few. And it was from these people that the first Christians formed the church in Corinth. Now, all the first Christians were Jewish men and women in Jerusalem and the surrounding regions that came to know Christ first. But as Paul went out on his missionary journey and as other Christians went out, it was from cities like this that the church was formed. So, in following Jesus, Paul encourages them to give up their unhealthy and unhelpful former religious practices. Now that you've come to Christ, maybe you shouldn't be found with the temple prostitutes every Friday night, he's saying. The problem is, they were tempted just by being in Corinth, where all of these practices that they used to participate in were happening on a regular basis. So these early Christians struggled with sexual immorality and gluttony and drunkenness and so on. You know, those of us who have come to Christ later on in life might be able to relate to what it's like to have old sins of the past come knocking on your door every once in a while. And so the context of the verse, this verse in 1 Corinthians, is self-discipline in the face of temptation with the hope of avoiding sin, particularly in this case, the sins of sexual immorality and idolatry. And more than this, Paul is telling the Corinthian Christians that their experience is not unique. Just as the Israelites, who were God's chosen people, were tempted, so too will the Corinthians be tempted. In fact, we will all face temptation. Even Jesus himself was tempted in the wilderness. So all of this to say, in summary, that this passage is not about God declining to give you more burdens in your life than you can handle. It's about God helping you when you face temptation. Now, what is temptation? Well, I think temptation is a test of your resolve, your character, and your faith. And that's what Paul is talking about here. Not about adversity or difficult circumstances that come into every life at some point. And I think it's important to note that there are at least two things that Paul is not saying here. Number one, Paul is not addressing tragic circumstances or hardships that we may face, like loss, pain, or suffering. Paul is addressing temptation to former practices that are sinful or otherwise destructive. Second, Paul is not saying that God is up there making bad things happen to you just to see how far he can push your limits. That doesn't enter in at all. What God is saying, Paul is saying, is that when you are tempted, you have been given the resources to endure it. My son, Sam, who's in grade 6, is doing online learning these days, as many children in our province, regrettably, are having to do. And, you know, we first had him set up downstairs in the dining room, and then, you know, my wife Nikki's in the living room, I'm here in the nook, Sam's in the dining room, Paxton's running around doing whatever he does. He's 4. And it was too much. So we put Sam upstairs into the hallway, and we said, okay, here's your computer, here's your internet, you do your thing. You know, you stay off YouTube, you don't go to these sites, stay off the browser, just do your work. And he said, okay. And then at one point, we then moved him into his bedroom where we could give him a little bit more privacy, and frankly, he was kind of out of the way because he was in the way in the hallway. And, you know, last week, I came upstairs, I started walking by, and I saw his hand go psst, like this, you know, those. I thought that was odd. And I kept walking. I was on a mission. I think it was getting some info from upstairs for something for work. I don't remember. A few days later, my wife goes up to check on his work, and she's bending over his computer, and she's looking at things. She minimizes, and what does appear? But there's a YouTube video playing behind the screen that he had up, his work screen. And she said, "What's this? Have you been watching YouTube?" I don't know how that got there. It just randomly happened. I don't know. Well, it turns out that you can check the browsing history. I don't know if he knew that, but you can. And so we did. Sam's grades have been slipping the past couple weeks. He did terrible in math, and he's always good in math. And, you know, he didn't complete an assignment he was supposed to complete. It turns out he'd been on YouTube all day for a week and a half. All day, just constantly on YouTube, watching the dumbest things possible. People playing Minecraft and talking about it. That's what he watches. Can you believe it? That's what they do. I don't know. I've just alienated my demographic of 13 and 12-year-olds. I'm sorry. But that's what they do. And so it was just this whole thing. Not necessarily that he had done this and hidden it, but that he had lied about it right to our faces and lied again. He tried to lie even when we showed him the browsing history. It was just a whole thing. Anyway, that's part of growing up, right? We've all been there. I tell you this story to say that God did not put YouTube into Sam's life to tempt him, okay? God wasn't sitting around saying war, poverty, racism, greed. What should I do now? Where should my focus go? I know, let's attempt this 11-year-old with YouTube videos about Minecraft when he should be studying. I just don't think that's the way it goes. And, you know, because I'm a pastor, I probably should back that up if I can. James 1, 13 to 15, when tempted, no one should say, God is tempting me, for God cannot be tempted by evil, nor does he tempt anyone, but each one is tempted when by his own evil desires he is lured away and enticed. So if God didn't tempt Sam, who did? Well, Sam was the author of his temptation. And, you know, maybe it's possible, too, that the devil was on his shoulder encouraging him along. Now, that was a small temptation, right? Really, in the scheme of things, not a big deal. He'll forget all about this. We probably will, too, or we'll bring it up at his wedding. I'm not sure which. Unfortunately, we are all tempted at one time or another with bigger temptations, with more dramatic consequences than a C in math or lost screen time for the rest of the week. We may be tempted to drug or alcohol abuse, infidelity, self-harm or dishonesty at work, or silence or apathy in the face of injustice. I mean, we just know there are bigger things out there that we all face. But when we are tempted by these destructive choices, what Corinthians is teaching us is that God has provided us with a way out so that we may endure it. Paul is saying that we are not on our own in the face of temptation. Even if it doesn't feel like it, we have a choice of what to do next. But I think we should perhaps look at it this way. It's not that God won't give you more than you can handle, but that God will help you handle all that you have been given. Life can throw all kinds of trials and tribulations and temptations your way, but you are not alone. You see, God provides counselors and friends, pastors and family to care for us when we are in our time of need or when we struggle with temptation. He gave us his holy word, which guides us into all truth when we take it up every day. And he invites us into his own holy presence through prayer as we take our cares and our burdens and our temptations to him. And the more that I look at this, the more I can't help but think that when we do falter, when we do fail, he is there to pick us up and to cheer us on, saying, "You've got this because I've got you." And that, dear friends, just might be the news that we really need to hear. If you don't believe me, you can ask my friend Laura. It was definitely a dark time a few years back for her and her entire family as their little one, their beloved child, battled leukemia. But instead of growing bitter at God for what they might have felt was an unfair set of circumstances, they actually leaned into God as their source of strength and healing. And it would have been tempting to become bitter and angry, and I'm sure that they had more than their fair share of bouts with God when they were alone. But at the end of the day, they knew that they could endure because God, the church, and their family had their back. Now today, almost a decade later, that young boy is as healthy as a horse and growing taller and stronger by the minute. And I'd wager that he won't even really remember most of what happened in that part of his life. But his parents will. Because it was in that time of trial that they heard these words from the Almighty, "You've got this, because I've got you." And now they know it to be true. It's not just a theory for them anymore because they have experienced the presence of God. Dear friend, I know that you are struggling right now. I know that you face things that seem almost too much to bear. And maybe you feel powerless and alone. But you are not alone. For you see, it's not that God won't give you more than you can handle. God will help you handle everything that life has given to you. And when you find yourself doubting, and when you think that you cannot continue, please listen for these words whispered in those quiet moments of desperation. "You've got this," Jesus says, "because I've got you." Let us pray.